Top 100. Top 100. Top 100.
Project.
And action.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Top 100 Project, the podcast about classic movies that revisits the American Film Institute's 1998 and 2007 lists of America's top 100 movies. Spoiler alert. We will do our very best to rank every single second of this picture for you. It's our job. I'm Ryan Ellis with my wife, Bev. Hey, Bev.
Hi.
All right, so the Coming Attractions trivia question for this week's film, Sunset Boulevard, is: how many past or future directors are in the cast?
So, I can think of 3 past directors that appear in the film, but I'm going to assume that there must be at least one future director that I'm not thinking of, because otherwise you wouldn't have put that word in there. So, I'm going to guess 4, assuming that somebody, William Holden maybe, or somebody else, goes on to direct a film.
It is 4. And I thought Holden maybe would have directed when I looked at everybody in the cast. Mm-hmm. But no, he's not one of them.
Is it Artie?
Yeah, he's the 4th. Okay, so we'll name the more famous people. Cecil B. DeMille.
Yep, obvious one.
His only AFI film, and that's as an actor.
Oh,
the
yeah.
guy who has an award named for him at the Golden Globes for producing and directing,
Very
I guess,
famous
too.
name, yeah.
And yet he's never on the AFI except this one time. Eric von Stroheim,
Yep.
of course, directed Greed, which we talked about in Treasure of the Sierra Madre a few weeks ago.
Who plays Max in this film, who also is a director in the film.
In the film itself and in reality.
And, of course, Buster Keaton.
Yep.
Who's one of the... What does she call them? The Waxworks?
The Waxworks.
He calls them the Waxworks.
Yeah, Joe Gillis calls them that.
Yeah.
And
he doesn't have a line, does he?
He says pass when they're playing bridge.
That's it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But he's in there.
Mm-hmm. And the 4th is Jack Webb, and he's the future director and plays Artie. And he directed some TV shows and some movies as well, mostly TV shows. He was on Dragnet.
Well, I'm glad you put that word in there. Mm-hmm. The word future directors is the reason I guessed that. Oh, right. Got it.
Okay, the Top 100 Project's 37th movie, Sunset Boulevard, was 12th on AFI's 1998 Top 100 list between It's a Wonderful Life and The Bridge in the River Kwai, another William Holden film, but lost a bit of ground in 2007 and ranked 16th between 2001 A Space Odyssey and The Graduate. Sunset Boulevard was released by Paramount in the dead of summer on August 10th, 1950. This movie about the movie business was a success and has been re-released around the world many times since its debut nearly 64 years ago. Bev will describe the film for us with the skinny.
Hack screenwriter Joe Gillis, played by William Holden, is hired by aging, faded, and slightly crazy actress Norma Desmond, played by Gloria Swanson. His job to doctor a comeback script that she's been writing for years. The relationship soon becomes personal, causing the fickle Joe to become a kept man. Meanwhile, he writes a different script with his best friend's fiancée, which doesn't sit well with the jealous Norma.
Or in a nutshell, actress fulfills dream of filmmakers everywhere by murdering screenwriter.
I like that one.
Okay, Sunset Boulevard, your thoughts?
I liked it, and I think I can intellectually appreciate that it's a really good film on lots of levels, but for some reason this one just never got under my skin. It's the second time I've seen it, and I was hoping that this time around, especially because we're watching so many films from this era that I'm kind of immersed in the language, I thought hopefully that I would appreciate it more, which is kind of what happened when I watched Philadelphia Story a second time. But no, for some reason this film just I never get caught up in it, no matter what.
You don't know why?
I really don't know why. I can't put my finger on it. I think part of it might be that I'm just not a fan of William Holden, maybe?
Really?
Yeah. I don't love him in the movie. He just doesn't move me. I mean, you can't say a bad thing about Gloria Swanson. She's positively fantastic. Every word of praise that's ever been uttered for her performance is well earned and makes the film worth watching for anybody. I only use the Holden explanation because I can't think of another reason why, even though I love Double Indemnity. And Double Indemnity has all kinds of really similar themes. It hits the same notes. You got the same writer-director. You have a very bad woman who corrupts a very corruptible dude. And it has a bleak ending. It's
I don't think she's
very
a bad
dark.
woman.
You don't think she's a bad woman?
No.
Please defend this woman's actions.
The more I see this movie, the more I have trouble deciding who I'm siding with. Is it her or is it him? And this time, I wouldn't say it was always like this, but this time I sided more with her.
What?
Like you said in the description, she's crazy, or at least slightly crazy.
Yes, definitely.
So excusing the fact that she's mentally ill and incredibly delusional, and her delusions are being fed even worse by Max.
She's definitely being enabled.
Right. I forgive that to a point. She hires the man. Mm-hmm. She manipulates him, yes. She uses him for sex, but she's also paying him. If he had any real character, he would leave, like he threatens to do a few different times, but he wants the job. You remember the scene where they go out for clothes, and she wants to buy him a really nice coat? The salesman says about I think it's pronounced bicuna.
It's like, as long as the ladies pay.
Yeah, go for the more expensive jacket.
Yeah.
Well, as I recall, that's the one he does. Because he gives him a look like he doesn't want to buy that. Like, no, we're not doing that. But he does have it later on.
Yeah, he does.
So he's a whore.
And that's why I say he's corruptible. I'm not defending him, but you say if he had any integrity, he would leave. Well, he does leave, and look what happens to him.
She murders him. Obviously, that is when she becomes...
She's bad. She's bad.
I think at that point she is, but I don't think up until that point she's a villain in the way we usually think of her.
She's a complete narcissist. She's delusional. She's manipulative. She threatens suicide every time she doesn't get her way. And even if it was true, all these delusions that she believed, she'd still be a pretty terrible person who throws her weight around and uses her celebrity and wealth to get everything she wants all the time without ever thinking of another person.
Well, I wanted to be an actress at one point in my life, and I wanted to be this kind of actress. So maybe that's why I side with her.
You would have made a beautiful actress.
I am pretty. It's the pictures that got ugly. Not a very good quote. Okay, you're making me waffle on this. I guess what I mean to say is that it's not as simple and as black and white. Even though this is yet another black and white film, we still haven't had a color film in forever.
No, it's
on
been
the
a long time.
Top 100 project. We had one with last week's When Harry Met Sally for a Not 100 project film, and obviously plenty of our now playings. In fact, almost all of those are color. But here's a black and white film that is extremely shades of gray, and that's I guess what it is. My sympathies throughout the production until the end. Maybe I should put it that way. Go back and forth with the two of them. When she becomes a murderer and does it simply because he's leaving, he's not hurt her physically. He's not stolen anything from her.
He's just leaving. Then, and she coerced him
up until that point, though, I guess is what I should have said.
Okay, but she's coerced him into staying this whole time. She has known that he doesn't want to be there. She's known that well enough to aggressively coerce him into staying. Whether it was getting her butler to go get his stuff for him from his apartment, keeping money away from him and just paying him with presents and with taking care of him, but not actually giving him the cash that she owes him for the work that he's doing. She does everything aggressively to keep him there. I'm not saying... And he's in dire straits at the beginning of the movie. He actually is in a real pinch and desperately needs work and desperately doesn't want to give up and go back to Ohio and get a desk job and kind of, with his tail between his legs and go back home a failure. So while he definitely doesn't behave with the utmost of character, he has tons of remorse. He has tons of second thoughts about everything that he's doing.
His remorse is very convenient, though.
Sure, yeah, he kind of hates himself, and he doesn't even last that long doing it before he gives up. But then, even by the time he gives up on her and finally takes the steps to leave, he's so determined to leave that even with a gunshot in his back, he gets up and keeps walking until she shoots him again. And then he falls in the pool.
You know what's funny about that ending is that he never takes her seriously in the whole film. The final blow-off where she's pointing this gun at him. And he's got to assume it's loaded, and that's what gets him killed. If he takes her seriously, maybe he just disarms her and you're not going to shoot me, and maybe he doesn't get shot. Or if he doesn't completely ignore her, like she's a little kid with a toy gun or something.
That's a very good point, because she's such a fool. She's just such a mockable character, and he never... Yeah, you're right. He never takes her seriously.
Hey, this is a strange comparison, but it's kind of like Columbine. I want to be taken seriously, so I'll use a weapon and I'll murder you to be taken extremely seriously.
And aggressively trying to get somebody's attention over and over again. You have to keep raising the stakes. The one time he does take her seriously, the one exception would be when she tries to kill herself. And it works like a charm. Yeah. In fact, that's what puts him over the edge and has him agree to cross a line between employee and lover.
And he has sex with her, but it's still for money, so he is a whore.
Is it for money, or is it because he's genuinely worried about her? I mean, he left. He said to hell with the job, and he went to his friend's place, and he was like, I'm out of here. This is way too much for me. I think he was doing it because he felt responsible for the state that she was in, and he felt like if he didn't give in... I didn't feel like it was for money. You really thought that was strictly for money.
Knowing the way Billy Wilder views people and the way he viewed his characters... I think he liked his characters enough to write great scenes for them, great dialogue for them, and great movies for them. But I don't think he really liked them as people. I think in some cases he probably detested them. He had a lot of terrible people. His last of the 4 AFIers that he directed, The Apartment, Fred McMurray, who was in Double Indemnity, and who could have played Joe in this film.
Yeah.
He didn't want to play a gigolo, that's why he turned it down. But he's the bad guy in the apartment, and he's the third of that love triangle. He's a scumbag. Even Jack Lemmon's character in that movie is a complete opportunist for a lot of the film. And some of the things that he and Tony Curtis do in Some Like It Hot, they're more completely innocent, nice guys. But there's even some disputable things about something. Like, they're lying to the women they're trying to get with, or the woman they're trying to get with.
Yeah, they're kind of cads a little bit. But it's still a kind of cute comedy, innocent.
But also a film that did make the AFI list and could have Ace in the Hole, which was an absolute bomb. The film that was made the year after this by Wilder with Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas's character is a lying, manipulative newspaper man. Stalag 17 with William Holden, winning his only Oscar a couple of years after this film, 1953. Again, very much a Shades of Grey kind of character.
I guess Wilder really liked his villains, his anti-heroes.
But you didn't like Holden's performance. You know who also could have played this?
I don't know. I'm not saying I didn't like it. I'm not saying it was bad. Let me put it that way. I think I just maybe personally don't like Holden.
Wow, because he's one of my favorite of the classic actors.
Is he really? Yeah. Oh, gosh.
He was not first choice. We mentioned McMurray, Montgomery Clift.
Yeah,
was
that's right.
actually signed. He was going to do the movie, and he dropped out very close to shooting because art was imitating life for him.
That's right.
He was a kept man, and he's a pretty famously, now at least, he wasn't then, bisexual, if not, well, I guess he wasn't flat out gay because he was with women at times. And at that point he was with an older woman. And he was worried about that reflecting on him. He would have been great. I like William Holden a lot, but I think Clift maybe was the better choice.
He's a better looking guy, that's for sure. One of the problems with William Holden is he doesn't look young enough to be like that embarrassing age difference. I felt like he certainly looks younger than her, but not by that much. Not by so much that it would stick out like a sore thumb if they were out together.
Yeah, good point. She's supposed to be 50, and when they show her getting herself ready for what she thinks is her comeback, when they show her in pretty intense close-ups with magnifying glasses, when she's being epilated, when she's having hair pulled out of her face, she's got really great skin for someone who's supposed to be 50, and I guess Gloria Swanson really was 50.
Well, one of the things, they were going to dress her down. And incidentally, it was very hard casting her as well. They had a hard time casting altogether because these were such kind of despicable characters that a lot of actors were afraid of. Just
Mary
like
Pickford.
Mary Pickford, yeah. Apparently they just declined even offering
even during
her the
the
role.
pitch, they realized.
Yeah, they were like, oh, you know what, you shouldn't do this. But Mae West turned it down.
An actress named Paula Negri. They wanted her. Wilder especially wanted her. And I say they because Charles Brackett was his writing and producing partner for a long time. Actually, Wilder still wasn't producing films. He became a producer of his own films pretty much all the time, but not yet. And Brackett was a writing partner, and he would always be the producer. And they tried to cast Paula Negri, but they realized that her accent was just too much. She'd be
that's
too hard
right.
to understand.
That's right. So when they cast Swanson, because she looked so good for her age, they were like, well, we're going to dress her down. We're going to give her age makeup. We're going to make her look awful. And she says, no, don't do that. This character wouldn't look awful. She would have all these means at her disposal to look as good as possible.
Keep up with the latest fashions.
Keep up with
Mostly.
The latest. Did the costume designer win the Oscar for this?
No.
I think the set designer did, but the costume, it was Edith Head, I believe, was the costume designer. And she said this was one of the hardest films she ever worked on because she had to toe that line between the mausoleum that they lived in and this kind of bubble in time that she lived in, and the fact that her delusion would make her want to stay on top of fashion. She would still believe herself to be current and kind of an important figure in pop culture, so she would kind of be aware of fashion. And Gloria Swanson was a real fashion icon in her day, and just like a lot of other characters / actors in the film, they really did play on their real life personas to reflect in the film.
When she says that there wouldn't be a Paramount Studios if it weren't for me, some people say that's not literally true, but pretty close to true.
Yeah, she was one of the stars that kind of helped build the studio.
And Cecil B. DeMille did work with her when they were both a lot younger.
Yeah, that's right.
When he calls her little fella, he actually calls her something that he called her in reality. Because he said she was tougher than any man. Eric von Stroheim, who you said earlier, was a director. He directed her in Queen Kelly. That's the film that they're watching, and the scene in her personal.
Yeah, so cool.
Yep.
Great touches, like so much. So of course it'd be hard to cast somebody when you're trying to draw, and audiences, whether they want to or not, it's like they can't help associating actors with the characters that they play. And when you dip this much into reality, it is going to kind of poison your work prospects in the future. And actually, she did a handful of movies after this, but she said herself that every part she got offered was just a watered down Norma Desmond, and she didn't want to be typecast as this actress for the rest of her life, so she eventually gave up on film altogether. Moved to New York, worked in radio and television.
Did a lot of TV. I was looking at that too. But she worked for another 24 years, and she made very few films.
Yeah, she was no slouch, but she stopped making. Yeah, stopped making films.
The last AFI film we did, so 2 weeks ago, Alita Valley, didn't work that much in Hollywood after making The Third Man, which, again, we said at the time, Third Man wasn't really a Hollywood film, but it was embraced in Hollywood, it was embraced in all of America. For it not to have launched her, and now Swanson to be relaunched, but very briefly, it's kind of unfortunate that they both could have been much bigger than they were either ever in the case of Valley, or Swanson had a chance to be big again. So this is the third AFI in a row where the star shoots the co-star.
Oh, yeah.
Treasure Sierra Madre.
Yeah.
Bogart shoots Holt. In The Third Man, Joseph Cotten shoots Orson Welles.
That's so true.
Yeah.
The
And
40s, man.
two
Bleak
examples,
time.
they get murdered or killed. The other one does not happen. But yes, a lot of shooting.
I said the 40s, but this is we're in 1950 now. Sunset Boulevard came out in 1950.
Yeah, our first one from the 50s.
Yeah. But there's definitely a zeitgeist that is bleak.
This is another noir, too. Last week, or again, 2 weeks ago, The Third Man. And not that long ago, Double Indemnity. The Maltese Falcon wasn't that long ago for us. And then films that have noirish elements, like Citizen Kane and Treasure of the Sierra Madre. We keep saying this word in a lot of our recent podcasts, but dark movies.
Yeah, and it's been a long time, I think, since we've seen a comedy in the project, hasn't it? Sullivan's Travels was the last comedy we saw. That was
yeah, there's humor in It's Wonderful Life, but it's not a comedy.
Yeah,
Yankee Dandy's a musical, but it's not a comedy. Yeah, it's true. We'll get our fair share. Actually, with the 50s, we're going to see quite a few westerns. We're going to see a good mix of everything, actually. We'll see musicals. An American in Paris, which is only a few weeks away, and then Singing in the Rain is not too long after that. And we will now see a mix of color and black and white. We're going to start seeing actors like Brando finally gets into the project. We're going to see some more Jimmy Stewart. Couple more of his films. We finally see Hitchcock as a director, obviously.
So maybe this is like a last gasp for the 40s style of films.
Yeah, you can still feel the effect of World War II, for sure,
big time.
on America and on filmmaking. But they were getting back to grander productions. The other thing we're going to see in the 50s, I forget which AFI film it is off the top of my head, but we'll start seeing widescreen. They started doing that in 1952.
To combat television.
And the films from 53 that are on the list, Shane and From Here to Eternity, are not widescreen, as I recall. So I forget what the first one is, but maybe what Rebel Thought I Caused. But in any case, we'll start seeing that too. All right, back to Sunset Boulevard. Here was something I did not know until I was reading up on it later. They started this movie, one of the great screenplays of all time, won the Academy Award for Original Screenplay, but it was an unfinished script when they started.
Oh, we hear that, like, we say that so much. So many of the films that we talk about, to our surprise, have started with
I guess that's
unfinished
true.
scripts.
That's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we said is that one of the advantages, if you can pull it off, and you really have to be able to pull it off, but one of the advantages of starting with an unfinished script is you can then write the script to accommodate the actors. If you have actors as good as Holden and Swanson to direct your vision of where you want the film to go, then it can be a great advantage.
One piece of writing that didn't pan out was a deleted scene at the beginning of the movie where Joe is supposed to be in the morgue, and that's how the film starts. And he explains to the other corpses, I mean, it doesn't get up as a zombie, but through all the bodies just laying there, I don't know if you even would have seen their faces, and they're all talking, I'm Bob, I'm Joe, I'm Fred. How'd you get here? How'd you get here? And preview audiences didn't respond too well to it. And
I thought it was funny.
Yeah, and I would think it is too. It sounds kind of stupid, really.
Yeah, it kind of sounds pretty silly.
And another play-in with Wilder's previous movie, Double Indemnity, you've got the thing where the gunshot situation has happened. I can't say murder because McMurray doesn't die from the gunshot. But it's happened, and it's like we talked about before at the time, it's a rare thing to have the end of the movie. We see this all the time in modern movies, but the end of the movie and then an entire story is just mostly just really a flashback.
It's like bookended.
And we meet up with it at the very end to find out where it's going to go after the shooting in both cases. But we know that Joe is dead when the movie started, so he's a ghost, really, through the whole movie. And Norma kind of is a ghost in her own way, too. You know, I mean, I'm not saying she's not really there, but then she really isn't in anyone's life except for Max.
The whole film has so many macabre elements, because it's narrated by a dead man. The first thing you see is his corpse, and then the first time he meets Norma Desmond in the story, they think he's a mortician. They're waiting for him to collect the body of a chimp.
Question.
Yes.
What was Norma doing with that monkey?
Right? Like, you hear so many horror stories about people who keep chimps as pets. Who knows what happened? That was such a creepy detail. And then that little child's coffin. That house looks like an old haunted house. Yeah. She even has this kind of old style, like, monster movie Dracula posture.
Yeah, the way she gestures when he's reading her script for the first time, he looks over at her and she's smoking a cigarette. She's holding her hand in such a way that's almost like Max Schreck in Nosferatu is holding his hands all the time, his claw-like hands. And yeah, she has the grand gestures you just talked about too.
Yeah. Oh, she's so fabulous. She acts in her everyday life like a silent film star with all of the elaborate flourishes and faces.
The method was really coming into movies right around this time. Brando, and we mentioned Monty Clift and other people were bringing into movies. And it's like she's a method actor in her real life constantly. But not to prepare for a movie or not like we're in shooting for the next 3 months and I got to stay being President Lincoln. This is Always.
It's like her character is silent movie star, and she's constantly in character. But she's constantly acting in that over-the-top silent movie star way.
You often wonder what people are really thinking when they're alone with themselves. A regular person, your friend, your family member, whoever it might be. But what does a big star, in this case a faded big star, really think in their own little brain, especially when they're nuts?
She can't even accept reality.
Or her screenplay apparently is crappy. Now here's a question also I have for you. Is Joe a trustworthy narrator in this movie? Is he, like, he kind of reminds me of Holly from The Third Man. Is he actually very talented himself in the first place? Yes, he's writing a screenplay with Betty.
Yeah.
And Nancy Olson plays her quite nicely in a fairly small role. That's the fiance we talked about in the beginning of the podcast. But is he actually talented? Because she, as a script reader, Betty, turns down a previous story he made. And here's our first trivia question. What is the name of that baseball-related screenplay that Joe has written?
Bases Loaded?
Bases Loaded.
Yes. 2 for 2. So to answer your question, I think even though he's persistently joking about how he's not a very good screenwriter, he still in his mind believes that he's talented. He still believes that he's a genius.
Just needs
and
his chance.
He needs his chance. Nobody's discovered him yet. You know, it's because the studios only want this formulaic garbage, and so he keeps churning out these scripts. But if he had his chance to make whatever he wanted, he thinks it would be great. He still has enough humility to believe Betty when she criticizes his work and talks about, you know, the seed of possibility that's in it, and wants to work with her and wants to do what it takes to become a good writer, which is a commendable feature in any artist. But he also kind of has that arrogance when he's reading Norma's script for Salome. So I think he thinks, no matter what he says, and he has all his self-effacing jokes, I think he believes that he's a genius, and that if he just had enough money to make it, and maybe that's why he accepts Norma's terms, because he believes that if he just didn't have to pay the rent, if he just didn't have to struggle to get by, he would have the time and the means to become a really great writer.
He's doing it as his second job. He's working for her, doing the things he does for her, including having sex with her. Yeah. Is like his job. But yeah, he works off hours with Betty at night at Paramount.
Yeah. It's a good question if he's a reliable narrator, because he certainly shows the ugly parts of himself.
Yeah.
He's not withholding any details that he should be ashamed of. And there's definitely the strong insinuation that he should feel extreme shame. It'd be an interesting thought exercise to do this whole movie but switch the roles so that he's a woman and Norma's a man.
Be a little more offensive if that were the case, because it would feel like he's, what's the word I'm looking for, sexually harassing her?
Yeah. And suddenly you wouldn't feel so much sympathy for Norma. Yeah,
I feel less for it than when I started that at the beginning of this podcast when you made your point. Because of course I wasn't overlooking that she murders him, but I don't want to dredge this up again, but just that a good movie does that, though. We talked about it on, I think, Treasures of the Sierra Madre, but because it's Bogart for one thing. But he is a villain in that movie, and he certainly is through at least half of it, and he's a whiner and a loser through all of it. And yet we side with him to a point because it's a big star and it's a well-written role and he's an interesting character. And I said in that podcast, we're going to get some great movies that are about nothing but villainous people. The Godfather films, The Goodfellas, Pulp Fiction, all of these people are scumbags and criminals and murderers. The only people in the movie are scumbags and murderers and criminals and thieves. So I think that's why I waffle in a movie like this, where it's you want to side with... I mentioned the Godfather films. I can't wait to talk about Godfather 2. I like the Godfather, the first movie, more. But the second one has one of my favorite scenes of all time. And it's going to bring about a discussion for us between Michael and Fredo. And Fredo does some terrible things, as we'll learn in that film. But you sort of sympathize with him, too. And it's because it's well written. It's understandable. It's human.
Yeah. And I think that way about Norma, too. One of the things they do to help you sympathize with her is she kind of got a bum deal. You know, she was discovered when she was 17 years old, as they say, when she was still kind of a kid, and she launched into this huge career. There was an entire studio that was relying on her. Who knows how much they had to baby her and build her up to just get her to work, because she was making them so much money, and she of course made a lot of money as well. But she was created by the studio. Who knows what kind of person she would have been had she never been discovered. So there's definitely this implication that it isn't really her fault. It was part of this beast, and that's not kind of something they bring up throughout the film. And Wilder himself has said that his inspiration for the film was it was just because he lived in LA and he saw these relics of the old Hollywood silent system and all these old silent stars and people who used to be big shots in the industry but were ousted or they were kind of made redundant when the sound era took over. But they still were rich and they still lived in these mansions, and he would drive around and wonder, what do these people do all day? Like,
and they're not that old. It's not like they're 75 years old necessarily.
No.
Buster Keaton, we know, had been a huge star all through the silent era. And he made The General, which was our 4th AFI podcast.
It didn't work that much after the sound was introduced.
Right, but that's a big stretch between movies, though. I don't know if it's the biggest for AFI actors. I guess we'll find out as we go along. But it's certainly one of. H.B. Warner wasn't that long ago. He was Mr. Gower in It's a Wonderful Life. So that was only a few weeks ago for us. And Anna Q. Nilsson is the other one of the Waxworks. She was a Swedish actress. I didn't know much about her. But she's also... And then Hedda Hopper, at the end of the movie, plays herself. They all play themselves. All these people do. And she plays the gossip columnist who's in Norma's bedroom at the end of the film. Yeah, and she was also a player back in that era. So it's a cruel thing to cast these people in those roles and mock them, but they must have known what they were getting into, though, too.
Yeah.
And Keaton was doing a lot of crap, certainly by the mid-60s especially. We talked about that during The General. So maybe he just was glad to have a job.
God, that's sad. I like to think that he just was taking a poke at himself.
Yeah, well, hopefully. It gives the movie a lot of verisimilitude, though, when you have real people. Keaton by far being the most recognizable of those faces. Although, again, H.B. Warner was still working a fair amount all through that time. But to have those real people and then playing themselves. In fact, that was a really noticeable part of the movie for me in this viewing, is that so many of the characters in it are real people, or they're just extras, like the cops at the beginning and the end, when they fish out Holden's body and they have to arrest Norma. But apart from our main actors, the main foursome, who were all nominated for Oscars, incidentally, Holden, Swanson, von Stroheim, and Olsen were nominated for the 4 acting Oscars. But apart from them and a few other people, DeMille is himself, Keaton is himself, Nilsson is herself, Hedda Hopper is herself, H.B. Warner plays himself. Some of the other people involved in the filming when we see DeMille playing themselves. Interesting moment there. It's not a big cast, but not a tiny one either, and yet almost everybody is just as themselves. Let's talk a little bit more about Joe, because I find him to be a fascinating character. Plays off what I said before about waffling between the two and who I like more. Because he is a schemer and a hustler. Paul Schrader, the writer of Taxi Driver and directed some other films, he's been quoted as saying that you should always be hustling. When you wake up, you got to think about how you got to hustle that day. And of course you have to write or direct or act or whatever your job is. But you're always trying to hustle somebody. And
you get the impression in Hollywood everybody's trying to hustle each other as well. So he's trying to hustle Norma into giving him a job, but he's the one who's out hustled by her, who's trying to find a lover, and she
make
does
her feel
out hustle him.
Useful and in a way get her back in there because he's helping her rewrite her script. Well, we talked about this not that long ago, about the way that people in the business are so sycophantic. Like, for one thing, Steven Spielberg, we've mentioned him so often in our podcasts, that no one ever says a bad word about him.
You're always the one bringing up Spielberg, may I just note.
But this is not about his filmmaking. This is about his
reputation,
his brand, his reputation.
Yeah.
And no one ever says a bad word about the guy.
Never.
Now, maybe they're afraid. They don't want to burn one of the most powerful people in the business. But it also makes me wonder if maybe he just isn't a really nice guy, because why are people kissing each other's behinds all the time? Maybe it's because almost everybody in the business, no matter who you are, has been rejected, and actors especially, many times. And no one wants to be that person to yet again, especially after someone's made it, but maybe they're having troubles, maybe they're a Norma Desmond, and no one wants to be that person that drops them on their head all over again.
They're all incredibly sensitive. It's got to be a nearly impossible job to do and not drive yourself crazy.
And if you're a Harvey Weinstein kind of guy, he has enough power that it doesn't matter so much. But if you act the way that he's been known to act, or if you're David O. Selznick, who produced The Third Man and way back Gone with the Wind, you can be that kind of overbearing type of guy, but most people can't, because it's the old adage, when you're going up, if you are taking shots at people, you're going to take shots on the way back down. So we've talked about this before, but I really think that's part of it. I'm not trying to excuse the way that people are completely sycophantic to each other in the business, but I think
it's kind of nice that they're at least nice to each other in public. It makes for plenty of boring press interviews.
They want to have that opportunity to work with somebody again, even if
of course.
Or for the first time, and don't want to say something that would burn them, unlike a Shia LaBeouf who crapped all over Spielberg's
but
movie that he made with
his
him.
Reputation is just out there for everybody to see.
And getting worse all the time.
And he has a terrible reputation, and nobody bothers protecting him.
So I said that Joe's a schemer and a hustler. He's also an ingrate, and he's literally a whore in this film.
Yeah. He is. He's reluctant.
He also, he neglects the needy woman who's paying his salary. And he doesn't intend to, but he's making out and trying to make a move on his best friend's fiancée.
Yeah! He is such a dirtbag, isn't he? He's trying to steal his friend's girl.
He didn't set out to do that, but that's what is happening.
Yeah.
He's not fighting it the way he should be. And on the other hand, Norma is kind of like Kane.
Yeah.
Citizen Kane.
A damaged person with far too much power.
Trying to buy love.
Yeah.
Doesn't understand or know how to really truly give or receive love. So she's using money to do that. And then destroys everything around her in the process. And this is also a woman who must really hate the jazz singer way worse than we did. It signified the end of her career.
Yeah, really. Damn you, Al Jolson.
But who I really feel bad for in the end of this movie when it's over is Max. And the reason why is because A, he's deluded too.
Yes.
But B is what's he going to do when she's in the asylum now?
I don't know, live in her giant empty mansion.
And have no point to his life.
I guess. What was the point to his life as it was, though? His life was already pretty bad. I don't know if I feel that bad for him either.
Erich von Stroheim was not very respectful of this role. And later on he called it the butler role.
Well, he was playing a butler.
Yeah. But meaning like talking down about it. And yet it brought him back at least for a while.
Yeah.
Because he was one of the many forgotten people.
He's very good in it.
All right, so let's get back into Billy Wilder, the writer and the director, because he deserves to be talked about a little bit more than we have.
Yeah.
This is second of 4 AFIs. We still have Some Like It Hot in The Apartment, which will be not quite back-to-back, but they're back-to-back years. Mm-hmm. I mentioned that he co-wrote with Charles Brackett, who also produced. Brackett went on to write Titanic, not the 1997 version, but the 1953 version. Yeah. And he won an Oscar for that. And he produced The King and I. And he had a pretty good career without Wilder, even though they had a breakup that Brackett didn't really understand why.
Yeah, he never...
And Wilder went on to start working with I.A.L. Diamond for a lot of his career. He almost always had a co-writer. Interesting for somebody as creative as he was. We talked a lot on Double Indemnity about working with Raymond Chandler and the way that those guys battled. What do you think of Wilder's direction now for these two films? You've seen Sunset Boulevard before, so it wasn't new to you.
Yeah. I liked Double Indemnity better. I always love a director who doesn't pull their punches. He's anything but sentimental, and I really like that about him. Some Like It Hot I've seen as well, and I like that movie a lot. I don't love it, but I like it a lot. I really enjoy it. Again, I can't put my finger on why this movie didn't, like I say, get under my skin, because if I were to think about it, I couldn't think of a single flaw in his direction. He lets great actors give great performances, and it's beautifully shot. Yeah,
we should talk about how it was shot then, because John F. Seitz...
Same cinematographer that shot Double Indemnity.
And again, he used little, balled up something or other that he put into the air, so it gives that musty...
Aluminum, I think it was, or something like that, to create the dust, and it really
Even
works.
More appropriate in this house than it was in the Double Indemnity house, actually.
Because it's this musty old mansion that not enough people live in. And there's this really great contrast between the scenes that are shot in that house. There's such a great visual difference between that and every other scene, the scenes that take place in the studio lot, or when he's out with his friend at his friend's apartment. There's such a really great contrast between that. It's really well done.
Yeah.
There's a beautiful, incredible shot of Holden in the pool, his corpse in the pool. It's really tough to look at. It's so convincing looking.
They had a hard time getting that shot, and apparently what they eventually did was they put a mirror on the bottom of the pool and they shot, because the camera was in a, what do they call it? It was underwater boxes, and that wasn't working, so they shot the camera dry down in the mirror and his reflection. I don't know how that was better, but that's what I read is how they did it.
It looks great though. I love that shot.
Mm-hmm. And there's more ceilings. Citizen Kane showed them, and Stagecoach showed them, and many movies of course have ever since those two. But here's some more ceilings.
Yeah.
You gotta love it when you have a set that looks like it's a real place.
Yes, yeah. That mansion is almost like a character in the film.
Did you notice that there's prison bars at the front entrance of the mansion? They're not prison bars, but they're bars, and they could be mistaken for that for sure. And the editor was Arthur Schmidt. This is the first time that he worked with Wilder, but they would go on to do Some Like It Hot together as well. So no one really ever talks about the editing in this film, but it's really solidly done, and you don't notice it. I guess that's kind of the best thing you say about it.
Yeah, and the pacing is fantastic. It feels just like it moves at a perfect pace.
Right. The last technical person we should talk about is Franz Waxman, because he wrote the score.
Yes.
Great music. He also composed for Philadelphia Story, and he'll do 2 more AFIers for us, A Place in the Sun and Rear Window.
Yeah, I love, right from the first shot, when that beautiful credit sequence that starts with Sunset Boulevard on the curb of all places, not a sign up there. It's no, right down in the gutter, Sunset Boulevard, and the camera rolls along the street, and that music, it just captures you right away. It is a great score.
The movie starts with a close-up of a street, and it ends with a close-up of a crazy person. The name of the movie and then the star of the movie. What a great
final. Can we talk about the final scene?
Of course.
So, oh my gosh.
Extremely famous ending, yeah.
when she's just coming down the stairs and just every move that she makes, it's so intentional and perfect, and her walking towards the camera and going out of focus. Oh my god, it's beautiful.
It's also great that nobody else really ever moves.
And it's kind of an appropriate thing to do because she doesn't really see other people, I think, as human beings as important as herself. The world revolves around her so completely that I don't think she would consider the motives or actions of other humans unless she directly cared about what they were doing.
Those cops are like the film crew.
Yeah. And they're kind of like mannequins to her, right?
Yeah.
The press, they're kind of like mannequins.
So why should they move? Why should they be real?
That's how crazy she is. That's a type of mental illness that has overcome her.
One more trivia question, and it kind of plays on what we're talking about, how she murders Joe. How many times does she shoot him, and where?
I think she shoots him 3 times in the back.
Yep. 2 in the back and 1 in the stomach. The one in the stomach is what puts him away.
What, does he roll over onto his back?
He turns towards her, and then that's how he falls in the pool. She shoots him right in the gut, and then he does like a pirouette, and he ends up in the pool. Well, the influence is easy. It's a lot. There was a successful stage play, for one thing. But I was going to bring up The Bad and the Beautiful when we were talking about the way that people are drawn to stars, because the producer, Kirk Douglas's character in The Bad and the Beautiful, he's not an actor, but they're drawn to him. I'm not going to give away how that movie ends. We may eventually cover that on a Not 100 Project film. But it's got that same kind of quality that this one does, where you do side in some ways with the bad dude in the film. Mulholland Drive also has an awful lot of comparison with this, too. One of the great modern... Not really a noir, I guess you could call it that if you want to get...
I don't know if you can even categorize that film. Let's just call it a Lynch.
Yeah. And then just about every movie about movies that's ever been made since could owe some debt to Sunset Boulevard. Whatever happened to Baby Jane and Mommy Dearest are
of
two
course.
Good examples of that, with the insane leading female character.
Even a movie we're going to see soon, it's not about Hollywood, but it's about the theater, All About Eve.
Next week. Yeah.
Definitely about like the ego of an aging actress and how that might make her behave a little crazy.
Yeah.
And about just like how crazy you become when you are that big of a star and you enjoy the advantages and privileges of being a star.
That movie has a different kind of ending, at least, though.
It definitely plays out differently, but yeah.
The awards and other AFI list for Sunset Boulevard, it won 3 Oscars for the screenplay, we talked about that, for the sets and the music score by a Waxman, with nominations as well for picture and director and the 4 actors I mentioned, and for the cinematography and the editing. It made the National Film Registry the first year they were doing that, in 1989, and then the other AFI lists it was on, Franz Waxman's music was 16th on the top 25 music scores, and the 2 famous quotes, "I am big, it's the pictures that got small," was 24th, and "All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up," and that was 7th.
Another very misquoted famous quote.
Yeah, we've had a few in the last little while with Casablanca. But nobody says "Play It Again, Sam," and Treasure.
Yeah,
was,
most people
the
say
badges.
"I'm ready for my close-up now, Mr. DeMille."
Yeah, that one's not as badly mangled as some of the other misquotes.
No.
The spirit is awfully close to being the same, but yeah, it's not quite exactly the way people think. So, parting thoughts.
I would certainly recommend it. I don't know if it's a movie I'm crazy about seeing again anytime soon, but
that's disappointing.
I feel like the defect is in me somehow.
I'm getting more out of it the more I see it.
Yeah, maybe.
Because when I first saw this movie, and I had seen All About Eve first, and we're going to give away the goat here because that is our podcast next week. We're already going to promo it. I preferred All About Eve for a long time, and now the last several years when I've seen Sunset Boulevard, way more than I've seen All About Eve, it's changed that. Now maybe next week when we finish All About Eve, I'll say at the end, oh, you know what, after seeing it again. But right now I'm definitely an Sunset Boulevard guy. Maybe partly because it's a movie about movies, and I'm always stuck for those.
Yeah, you do always love that.
Documentaries about movies. I've watched every one of those that's on Netflix
true.
that there is, even if they're lame and bad and crappy. And anyway.
Well, certainly most of the world disagrees with me, so I am happy to be wrong because I still think, even not loving this film, it's certainly been very worthwhile for me to watch it.
Okay.
And I would totally recommend it to anyone.
It's not in my top 10 or 25, I don't think, but if I had a top 100, it would absolutely be on there somewhere. Yeah, maybe top 25 actually. Up next, as we just said, is Sunset Boulevard's main rival for the Oscars of 1950, and that was All About Eve, which upstaged it in a big way. This will be the only time we'll see the great Bette Davis, the one and only shot for her. So the coming attractions trivia for All About Eve. It isn't an Oscar, and it isn't a Tony. Whose name is on the award that Eve wins when the movie begins?
I wish I could say I'm only withholding my answer because I don't want to give it away from next week's podcast, but I can't actually remember the answer to that question. But we will give you the answer in next week's podcast. In the meantime, if you'd like more from Ryan and me, please visit our website, top100project.com, where we have more trivia for Sunset Boulevard, as well as all the other movies we've covered in the podcast. Please don't forget to subscribe to the Top 100 Project on iTunes. You can also find us on Podomatic, top100project.podomatic.com. We'd love to hear what you think of Sunset Boulevard. Do you agree with me? Do you agree with Ryan? Tell us your thoughts. Please send us an email, top100projectpodcast@gmail.com.
All right, Mrs. Ellis, I'm ready for this podcast to end.
And cut.